border. I'll tell you what they're not worried about. Their ally Israel dropping bombs in Syria, bombs so big that they've triggered an earthquake. So what's going on here? Why are Syria's neighbors targeting it, and will this lead to a whole new war? We'll discuss all of that. Meanwhile, in India, stocks have crashed and the rupee has hit a lifetime low against the dollar. What is causing this volatility, and should you be worried? We'll bring you the full story. In Canada, Trudeau is in more trouble. His Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister has resigned and made a scathing resignation letter public. In Bangladesh, Yunus and team are trying to rewrite history. They don't want to acknowledge India's role in liberating Bangladesh. What is a Starlink device doing in Manipur? Why are Europe's biggest economies, France and Germany, grappling with political instability? How did Ukraine kill a top Russian general in Moscow? How Argentina came out of recession with President Milei's chainsaw policies, and why other countries want to adopt them. Why tech giants are making a beeline to woo Donald Trump, and how can you boost your memory? How can you maximize it? We'll tell you the story of a man who wins Scrabble championships, even in languages he cannot speak. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. In India, the One Nation, One Election bills are introduced in the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of parliament. 269 lawmakers voted in favour of the move, while 198 MPs opposed it. The bills call for simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha, state assemblies and local bodies. Myanmar rebels say they have recaptured their headquarters. This comes almost 30 years after they were forced out by the military. The fighters seized Maner Plo, which is on the Thai border. Since the 2021 coup, Myanmar has been in turmoil. China calls spying claims involving UK's Prince Andrew preposterous. A Chinese spy reportedly used his links with Andrew to snoop for Beijing. The Starmer government has voiced concerns over these allegations. Last month, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK met Chinese President Xi Jinping. He was the first British Prime Minister to do so since 2018. The European Union launches a probe into TikTok amid claims that it was used by Russia to meddle in Romania's presidential election. The November election was later annulled. The EU says the decision to probe was based on declassified intelligence reports. Not a good day for big tech either. The Democratic Republic of Congo sues Apple, accuses the tech giant of using conflict minerals in its supply chain. The DR Congo is a key source of minerals needed to produce computers and mobile phones. Geopolitics is a cutthroat world. If you display weakness, you're done. Others will jump to capitalize on your vulnerability. Just ask Syria. They're facing threats from all sides, from Israel, from Iran, and pretty soon, maybe Turkiye. President Erdogan of Turkiye is reportedly making moves. He is building up military forces near the Syrian border. We're talking about Turkish commandos, militias allied to Ankara, and a lot of artillery. They have amassed near the city of Kobani. It is located in northern Syria and borders Turkiye. The US says an incursion is imminent, that Erdogan will order his troops to invade Syria. And why would he do that? To neutralize the Syrian Kurds. Now, some quick background here. Kurds are an ethnic group spread across West Asia. You have Kurds in Iran, in Turkey, in Syria, and in Iraq. The Syrian Kurds are supported by the United States. They control considerable parts of northern Syria. They help the Americans fight the Islamic State. But Erdogan says the Kurds themselves are terrorists. In the past, he's talked about pushing them away from the Turkish border. He's also talked about creating a buffer zone, a sort of no man's land between Turkey and Syria. And now that he's moving troops, there is fear of an invasion. Today, Erdogan was hosting European officials. He did not reveal much about his plans, but he did say that he would not allow Kurdish terror groups to flourish in Syria. Listen in.
The fight against Islamic State and the Kurdistan Workers' Party militants and its extensions topped the list of issues we discussed in our talks. Turkey is the only country that defeated both terrorist organizations on the ground. It is the only NATO member to do so. We will certainly not allow these organizations to grow.
Now the Kurds are worried. A top Syrian Kurdish official has written to Donald Trump. He wants the incoming US president to help. Listen to what he says, and I'm quoting, "Turkiye's goal is to establish de facto control over our land before you take office, forcing you to engage with them as rulers of our territory." The Kurds know that they are vulnerable. They've already been driven out of some Syrian cities. If Türkiye enters the battlefield, it will get worse, which is why they are turning to Donald Trump. But will he help them? Well, history is not favorable. In 2019, Trump pulled out some US soldiers from Syria. He also did not object to an offensive by Turkey. The Kurds were stunned by his decision then. They accused the US of betraying them after years of fighting together. Now, it's not clear if Trump will do the same again, but he made a big statement on Monday. He said that Turkey will play a major role in Syria's future.
Syria has a lot of, there's a lot of indefinites. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Syria. But I think Turkey is going to hold the key to Syria, actually. I don't think you've heard that from anybody else, but I've been pretty good at predicting.
Does he mean that in a good sense, or is that a warning to Erdogan? As always, Trump did not bother to clarify, so frankly, things are not looking good for the Kurds. You've got a lame duck president in Washington, an unfavorable president coming up, and a massive Turkish build-up at the border. What do the new rulers of Damascus make of this? We're talking about the HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They're in charge in Damascus. They have talked about forming an inclusive regime. So do they approve of this Turkish plan? Listen to the rebel spokesman.
As for the Kurds, they are one of the components of the Syrian people, and we are very keen that this group has its rights protected. The social fabric in Syria is a source of strength and not weakness. But we affirm that we don't any part of Syria to be separated.
Now, two things to note here. One, the rebels do want Kurds to be part of Syria. But two, they don't like Kurdish autonomy. They want the country united under one regime in Damascus. Of course, that depends on the political process, how inclusive and fair it is. But the problem goes beyond Kurds and Turkey. Regional players sense Syria's weakness, so they're carving up the country. Yesterday, Israel dropped a bomb on Tartus. It is the second largest port city in Syria. Israel attacked it. And look at the size of that mushroom cloud. The blast was so big that it triggered an earthquake. And what was Israel targeting here? Syria's military assets, mostly those belonging to the ousted regime. Israel is also pushing further into the Golan Heights. This is technically Syrian land. Israel occupied it in 1967, and since then it has been in Israeli control, the Golan Heights. After Assad fell, Israel took over a buffer zone in Golan Heights. They're also sending more people to this region. The goal is to double the Israeli population in the Golan Heights. More settlements, more control. That's the idea. Of course, the Americans won't criticize Israel. They will ring alarm bells over Turkey. They will warn about ISIS. But Israel can drop earthquake bombs on a sovereign country, a country that's not even at war with them. And the risk here is obvious. Israel has taken out most of Syria's strategic military capabilities. I'm talking about jets, warships, and missiles. Turkey is looking to push deep into northern Syria. They want to create a buffer zone, and the US is sitting pretty in the south with a military base. So what is Syria left with? A crippled military, frequent air raids, and neighbors invading at will. This is a make or break moment for Syria. Their people have a shot at stability after years of fighting. Instead of helping them, Syria's neighbors are making things worse. They want to exploit Syria's vulnerability. It's a risky and irresponsible move, one that could leave Syria even more broken and destabilized. Our next story is from India, where the markets had a terrible Tuesday. Stocks crashed today. There was widespread selling across major sectors. India's currency, the rupee, is also under pressure. Let's show you the numbers, starting with the Sensex. It tracks the top 30 companies of India. The Sensex plunged by over 1,000 points today. The Nifty was in the red too. This index represents the country's top 50 companies. It was down by over 300 points. Both indices fell by just over 1%, which may not seem like a very big loss until you look at the trajectory. The past few months have been rough for Indian stocks. Markets posted losses in both October and November. This was their first back-to-back decline since February 2023. In December, in the first couple of weeks, we saw some recovery, but it did not last. So what's fueling this volatility? Broadly, there are three reasons. First, the impending rate cuts in the US. The US Federal Reserve is meeting tomorrow. That's the American Central Bank. It is expected to cut interest rates. There's a lot of speculation that this may be the most significant rate cut in 4 years. And if it happens, it will trigger a chain reaction. It could push investors to rethink their investments. Here's how it works. When the central bank cuts rates, loans become cheaper, people borrow more, so there is more cash flow into the economy. Investors tend to leverage this by stepping up their investments. That is how it usually plays out. But this time, there is uncertainty, a fair bit of it. Investors don't know how this rate cut will pan out. So they're being cautious. That's reason number one for market volatility. Reason number two is the Indian rupee. It is getting weaker against the US dollar. Today, the rupee dropped to its lifetime low against the greenback. $1 US was worth close to 85 Indian rupees. And what led to this fall? India's widening trade deficit. Gold imports are surging. In the month of November, they hit a record high. India imported nearly $15 billion worth of gold last month. $15 billion in 1 month. That's how much gold we imported. That's more than double from October. In October, just $7 billion worth of gold was imported. So this surge has widened India's trade deficit. In November, it stood at around $38 billion. Economists expected a number closer to $24 billion. Clearly, the deficit is way above expectations. And when that happens, it is not an encouraging sign. An increasing trade deficit means that India's dependence on imports is rising. And this has a ripple effect on the rupee. It makes the Indian currency weaker. Stock market investors too have made a note of that. The rupee's fall is keeping them on the edge. That's reason number two. And now for the third reason, FIIs, foreign institutional investors. FIIs have turned bearish on India. On Monday alone, they sold stocks worth 279 crore rupees. In one day, that's over $30 million. Now, it's hard to say if this indicates a broader trend. In November, FIIs pulled over 16 billion from the Indian markets. But towards the end of November, there was a shift. FIIs started buying again. They purchased just over $1 billion worth of Indian equity. So we'll have to wait and watch, I guess, to see if these foreign institutional investors are ready to make a full-fledged comeback. Perhaps they too are waiting for the right time. The Indian economy is facing some headwinds. GDP growth dropped in the last quarter from July to September. India grew by 5.4%. Compare this to the previous quarter, April to June. Growth was at 6.7%, this time 5.4%. But the government is optimistic about a recovery. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has spoken about this. She says the second quarter was challenging, but the slowdown is a quote-unquote temporary blip.
So, it's important to understand that this drop happened just 2 quarters in the last 12 quarters that we're talking about. So let us not sort of pick on that one and predict future. This has been a steady growth and a steady sustained growth. So I'd like to place that perspective before.
Despite recent challenges, India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world. It will have to find a way to accelerate. And it won't be easy given the rising geopolitical uncertainties. There are lots of variables, lots of moving parts. The next few months will be critical both for the economy and the stock markets.
the challenges we're facing as a continent, as countries.
Now let's turn to Canada. They're also seeing a free fall, but of a different kind. The Canadian collapse centers around their Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. You would have thought that Trudeau hit rock bottom a long time ago. He is deeply unpopular. His approval rating is hovering below 30%. He is running a minority government, kept afloat thanks to outside support from the ever-fickle Khalistani Jagmeet Singh. That's already a precarious situation. But somehow, Justin Trudeau managed to make it worse. He managed to alienate a key member of his own party this time, and this led to the latest debacle. Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has resigned. She was also Canada's Finance Minister. Freeland publicly tendered her resignation with this scathing letter. She says that Justin Trudeau asked her to step down from the Finance Ministry. This happened on Friday. She said they had been at odds for weeks over Canada's finances. Freeland wanted to cut spending. She wanted to rein in the budget deficit, which had ballooned to 60 billion Canadian dollars. Her target was 40 billion. The budget deficit was 60 billion. But Trudeau was not letting her do it. He refused to control government spending. So now she's resigned. And in her resignation letter, Freeland said that Canada needs to prepare itself for Donald Trump. He will take over as the US president in about a month's time, and he has threatened tariffs on goods from Canada. Trump could impose tariffs as high as 25%. This would wreck Canada's export sector. So Freeland said that Ottawa needed to keep, and I'm quoting, needed to keep its fiscal powder dry. And it seems Justin Trudeau was not thinking about Canada, he was just thinking about himself. Trudeau is planning to dole out money, $250 to Canadians earning less than $150,000 annually. This is to curry favor with the public. I just mentioned how Trudeau is extremely unpopular these days. When he first took office, his approval rating was around 63%. In June this year, it tanked to 28%. There's no way he's getting re-elected, not as things stand. Canada is going to polls in 2025 by October at the latest. So Justin Trudeau decided to shell out some cash to pay people to improve his popularity. But Freeland has called it a costly political gimmick. Those were her exact words, costly political gimmick. In the resignation letter, this is what she said. Trudeau's also planning to splurge on other gimmicks, like a tax break on essential items. This was scheduled for the ongoing holiday season. This Santa Claus Act will cost 1.6 billion Canadian dollars in lost tax revenue. The $250 handouts will cost almost $4.7 billion. This is when Canada's budget deficit is already $20 billion above the target. Obviously, Justin Trudeau is trying to buy himself some popularity. Canada's long-term fiscal health be damned. So Freeland quit. She abandoned the sinking ship. And she's not the only one. Canada's Housing Minister, Sean Fraser, says he won't seek re-election. That means he will probably get removed from the cabinet soon. And all this chaos has come as a gift for Trudeau's rivals.
The Prime Minister has lost control, yet he clings to power. He's lost control of immigration, lost control of the borders, lost control of spending, deficits, inflation, housing costs.
The leader of the opposition wants Trudeau to step down, so do other opposition leaders and even the so-called allies like Jagmeet Singh. He is the man propping up Trudeau's failed government, and he too has called for Prime Minister Trudeau to resign. We don't know if Singh will pull the plug, if he will rescind his outside support. But the writing on the wall is clear. Trudeau's government is an absolute failure. He needs to make way for a fresh election, so that the Canadian people can elect a government that works. But Trudeau refuses to do the right thing. He's appointed a new finance minister, a loyalist and a close friend.
My conversation with the Prime Minister today was entirely focused on the work that we want to do to support Canadians around affordability, obviously the threat of tariffs coming from an incoming administration, and what we need to do to protect the Canadian economy.
It seems that Trudeau's political gimmicks will get the green light. This is bad news for Canada, but good news for Trudeau. and for Donald Trump. It's better for Trump that Canada does not fight his tariffs. Trump put out this post on social media. He called Freeland totally toxic. And I'm quoting, he said, Governor Trudeau was right to fire her. Yes, Donald Trump is still mocking Justin Trudeau, calling the Canadian Prime Minister a governor and suggesting that they join as the 51st state of America to evade tariffs. Even in turbulent moments like this, it shows what a joke Justin Trudeau has become and why it's better for Canada if he steps down. Mohammed Yunus is rewriting history and not in a good way. He's erasing chapters from Bangladesh's liberation story, removing key characters and ignoring friends. We saw the perfect example of that yesterday. December 16 is Bangladesh's Liberation Day. On this day in 1971, Pakistan's army surrendered to India in Dhaka and thus Bangladesh was formed. It's a big day for both countries. For Bangladesh, it marked the end of Pakistani tyranny. For India, it was a decisive military victory. Indian soldiers were welcomed in Dhaka as liberators. But Yunus does not like that story. He does not like this history. Let me tell you what happened on Monday. Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted this message on Victory Day. He praised the sacrifice of Indian soldiers. He also honored their courage and dedication. But Yunus's ministers did not like that. Look at how Bangladesh's law minister responded. Look at what he wrote, and I'm quoting, 16 December 1971 was Victory Day for Bangladesh. India was just our ally, nothing else. Here's what a student leader wrote, and I'm quoting again. The war was for Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan, but Modi claimed the war to be only of India and their achievement. This sentiment is not isolated. It's pretty widespread in Bangladesh. Yunus's minister and aides, leaders of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the student leaders, all of them have condemned Prime Minister Modi's statement. They want to separate India from Bangladesh's liberation. Now, I know this is a news show, but I guess a history lesson is in order. Until 1971, Pakistan had two parts, West Pakistan, which is modern-day Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is modern-day Bangladesh. Bengalis in the East were denied political power and freedoms. When they rebelled, Islamabad cracked down. They unleashed a genocide in East Pakistan. Reports say some 3 million people were killed. And seeing this, India intervened. At first, the Indian military trained Bengali freedom fighters. Then in 1971 came direct intervention. India's army, navy and air force were pushed into action. And that is how the tide turned. After 13 days of fighting, Pakistan surrendered. India lost 3,000 soldiers in that war. India also faced intense Western pressure. At the United Nations Security Council, multiple resolutions were moved against India, yet New Delhi pushed on. India freed Bangladesh from Pakistan's genocidal grasp. This is not propaganda or fiction. This is a fact. This is how things unfolded in 1971. Until August this year, even Bangladesh acknowledged this. But Mohammed Yunus wants to move Dhaka away from India, so this history does not suit him. And this treatment is not limited to India, by the way. Yunus is erasing Bangladesh's biggest hero as well. The nation's founder, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He was Bangladesh's tallest leader by the 1960s. He led the liberation movement against Pakistan, and for that, he was arrested. Sheikh Mujib spent more than 4,600 days in Pakistani jails. 4,600 days, that's almost 13 years. He was in jail. But guess what Yunus did? He did not even mention Mujib in his speech yesterday, and frankly, it's not a surprise. Yunus has been erasing Mujib from Bangladesh's history. His portraits have been removed, his statues have been vandalized, and his picture will soon be removed from Bangladesh's currency. Why? Because Mujib is Sheikh Hasina's father. Apparently, that erases all the years he spent in jail, all the efforts he made for liberation. It's insecurity and ingratitude of the highest order. Mohammad Yunus is destroying Bangladesh's liberation legacy of secularism, of cultural freedoms, and of good neighborliness. He's replacing that with anarchy and radical Islam. I'm sure India won't be happy about this pivot. And Sheikh Hasina certainly isn't. She has started to speak out from exile. Listen to what she said about the Yunus regime. I'm quoting again. Their main goal is to create resentment against the spirit of the liberation war and the forces supporting the liberation war and to silence them. They are secretly supporting the anti-liberation extremist communal forces. That's a fair assessment, we have to say. We understand that the new regime wants to set itself apart. It wants a clean cut from Sheikh Hasina. But you cannot do that by revising history. That's an insult to the Indian soldiers who fought for Bangladesh, and more importantly, to the 3 million Bangladeshis massacred by Islamabad.
जो अत्याचार हो रहा है माइनॉरिटीज़ पे, जो बांग्लादेश के हिंदू हैं, बांग्लादेश के ईसाई हैं, उसके बारे में कुछ करें, बात करें बांग्लादेश की सरकार के साथ, अत्याचार बंद कराएं।
देखिए, वो इंदिरा गांधी की पोती है, जवाहरलाल की परनातनी है, तो वो कुछ भी कर सकती हैं। उनको फिलिस्तीनी से प्रेम है, पाकिस्तानी से प्रेम है, बांग्लादेश से प्रेम है, उनको हिंदुस्तान से प्रेम नहीं।
अब राजनीति में बैग से राजनीति होगी, बैग से देश चलेगा, यही दुखद है। अब बैगवा तो हम लेके चला, कोनो बैग तो ही नहीं, तो हम भी भगवा पहन लेंगे। अब इसे तो देश ना चली, देश चलता तर्क वितर्क करने से, विचारों से, विजन से। बैग से देश चलने लगा, बैग से क्या संदेश है हमको ये समझ में नहीं आता। अब वो जमाना गया है कि बैग दिखाएं और टोपा दिखाएं और टोपी दिखाएं, उससे नहीं चली। देश अब मोदी जी ने बातों से, कर्मों से, कार्यों से, ईमानदारी से, विजन से, दूरदृष्टा सोच से देश चलेगा। इकोनॉमी को स्ट्रांग करना है, बैग से देश नहीं चलता भैया।
ये प्रियंका वाड्रा का टोट बैग नहीं, ये प्रियंका वाड्रा का सिंबॉलिक वोट बैग है। एक नया बैग निकला है, माइनॉरिटीज ऑफ बांग्लादेश। अरे वाह प्रियंका जी, जरा बताइए ये माइनॉरिटीज कौन है, जरा नाम लेकर बताते ना। हिंदूज, वैसे तो आप बोलते रहते हैं पूरे देश में कि मुस्लिम्स आर अंडर थ्रेट, इस्लामोफोबिया है। यहाँ तो आइडेंटिफाई हो जाता है विक्टिम आपका, वहां पे विक्टिम आइडेंटिफाई नहीं हो रहा है आपका। बांग्लादेश में माइनॉरिटीज आर अंडर थ्रेट, वी स्टैंड विद माइनॉरिटीज। व्हाई नॉट से दैट यू स्टैंड विद हिंदू? साफ साफ क्यों नहीं बोलते? व्हाइट वॉशिंग का बैग है ये सिंबोलिज्म और टोकनिज्म की निशानी है ये। और सवाल ये बनता है कि माइनॉरिटीज और बांग्लादेश की चिंता आज कर रही हैं। सीए लॉ विरोध किसने किया? सीए लॉ जिसका पूरा का पूरा लक्ष्य था कि ऐसे प्रताड़ित लोगों को सुरक्षा दी जाए, उसका विरोध करने के लिए एक बैग कैरी कीजिए कि हम माफी मांगते हैं कि सीए का विरोध किया।
Well, what's there in a bag? Plenty if it's making a political point. That's exactly what Priyanka Gandhi Vadra did on day 2, when this time round she carried a bag saying that the minorities in Bangladesh need to be protected. She was of course referring to both the Hindus as well as the Christians. Remember when she carried an earlier bag on Palestine that had evoked a sharp response from the BJP, where they asked her this question that you're feeling very strongly for the Palestinians because of your vote bank politics. But what about the minorities being attacked in Bangladesh? At that point of time, she had rebutted by saying that I will wear what I want to. This is a deep-seated mindset of patriarchy where men will dictate to a woman what she wants to wear. Well, on day 2, she made that political point and tried to rebut the BJP in her own way by carrying a bag. It's a cloth bag. It also very clearly says that save the minorities of Bangladesh. With this, she hopes to silence her critics in the BJP and some outside as well, who indeed were asking that why is the Congress party making a mistake yet again as far as minority appeasement profile which is being projected. This question was also being asked that while you may feel strongly about the Palestinians, equal voice should have been raised and that show of solidarity should have taken place as far as the minorities in Bangladesh is concerned. Well, she did it, and in fact the Congress party has flaunted it. But interestingly, on the same day when she carried that pro-Bangladesh minority bag, the Congress also protested at the Makar Dwar. This was a decision which was taken at a meeting of the Congress party that we are going to rebut the BJP. At the meeting it was decided, and therefore you saw several Congress MPs carry a similar bag and also shouting slogans that why is the government not doing enough to protect the minorities of Bangladesh. Bags and women are identified. Many ask this question that why is a woman grudged her bag? But women politicians and bags have often evoked a very strong narrative, especially a political one. Let's step back in time and talk about the bag carried by Mayawati. Remember that signature style of hers where she would carry a small bag and often the men in her party would hold that bag on her behalf. In fact, the statue which was made of
On Monday, the Manipur police carried out search operations in the state. They found a lot of weapons, which is not surprising. But here's what is. Here's what stands out in the items that they found. A Starlink terminal. Starlink is a satellite internet provider. It is owned by Elon Musk. It is not legal in India. It does not have permission to operate here in India. So how were militants using a Starlink device in the Indian state of Manipur? And why has this become a pattern? How does Starlink appear in remote villages and conflict zones? Who regulates it? Can technology cross borders without permission? And is this too much unchecked power for one man, Elon Musk? We ask because in the wrong hands, even a tool for connection can become a tool for chaos. Our next report has more.
In November this year, the Indian Coast Guard apprehended a fishing boat from Myanmar. On board were over 5,000 kilograms of methamphetamine. It was the biggest such drug bust by the Indian Coast Guard, estimated to be worth over $4.25 billion. But what made news was how the drug smugglers got there. They were reportedly using a Starlink device. It was to navigate Indian waters and reach the shore. This raised concerns because Starlink cannot operate in India. It doesn't have the permission. Neither can it provide coverage in India's waters. And this wasn't the only incident. The Manipur police yesterday carried out search operations in the state. They recovered over 29 weapons from militants. But along with that, there was also a Starlink device. The authorities recovered a satellite internet antenna and a router. There's Starlink written on it. This is the first instance of Starlink being discovered in this region, and it raises some critical questions. Starlink isn't legal in India. So, what is this device doing here? Especially in Manipur, which has been battling ethnic violence for over a year now. To answer that, let's look at Starlink first. It's a satellite internet constellation, basically a system of over thousands of satellites. The company is a subsidiary of Elon Musk's SpaceX. SpaceX began launching Starlink satellites in 2019. Right now, there are nearly 6,000 of them. How is Starlink different from normal satellites? Starlink satellites are low orbit. Most satellites are located around 1,000 kilometers from the Earth. Starlink satellites are much closer. That means it can provide faster internet service. It also means Starlink can provide internet to the most remote areas, whether it's the middle of a desert or on top of a mountain. Starlink's ability to operate independently of traditional infrastructure makes it very attractive, especially for countries mired in conflict. During Russia's invasion of Ukraine, internet services shut down. Elon Musk immediately made Starlink available. About 15,000 Starlink routers were shipped to Ukraine. It kept services running. It helped Kyiv in the battlefield. In the Sudan war, Starlink was a lifeline for civilians and humanitarian groups, especially amidst the widespread communications blackout. But the use of Starlink in active war zones has sparked intense debate. Some people argue that it breaches national sovereignty because it bypasses local telecom regulations. Others warn of its dual life potential. It also blurs the line between a private company and an active player in a conflict, which makes Starlink a target as well. Russia says it has now developed a Kalinka system, one that can detect and disrupt Starlink signals. In some cases, Starlink itself has drawn boundaries, like in the case of Sudan. On 30th April of this year, SpaceX said it would stop operating in Sudan. That left millions in the war-torn nation without internet. The company says it's only allowed to operate in authorized countries. It's also a lot of unchecked power for just one man, Elon Musk. He dictates where Starlink can or cannot operate. In 2022, Ukraine was planning a maritime drone attack. The attack would have been carried out using Starlink. Musk reportedly knew about this, and he asked his engineers to turn off the coverage. The SpaceX CEO believed it could lead to a major escalation. That's a lot of leverage for just one company. And it could only increase over time given Musk's close proximity to Donald Trump right now. So in a connected world, where does accountability begin and who draws the line? On one hand, it's a tool that connects the unconnected. On the other, it can be a weapon in the wrong hands. As the world embraces new technologies like Starlink, the need for global regulations becomes imperative. Because without checks and balances, even the stars can fall out of line.
Europe famously has two engines, Germany and France. They drive the European economy forward. They also determine Europe's politics. But right now, both engines are stalled. France has a minority government, and Germany's government has just been ousted. So we'll begin with Berlin. Chancellor Olaf Scholz himself triggered this collapse. His coalition broke down last month. Scholz wanted to increase public spending, but his alliance partner disagreed. So what did the Chancellor do? He requested a confidence vote himself. It's a bit of a quirk in German politics. The Chancellor themselves must call for the confidence vote. Only then can the parliament be dissolved. So Olaf Scholz called for the vote. He did not expect to survive it, but he called it anyway because he wanted snap elections. He wants to seek a fresh mandate. The question is, will he get it? Let's look at the opinion polls. Scholz's party is at number 3. They are projected to get 17% of the votes. At number 2 is Alternative for Germany, which is a far-right political party. And at number 1 is the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, which is the party of Angela Merkel. They are expected to get 31% of the vote. The election is slated for February next year, February 2025. As things stand, Olaf Scholz is on his way out. The German media is calling it a kamikaze move, basically a suicidal political decision to call for the confidence vote. Very similar to what Emmanuel Macron did in France. There were elections to the European Parliament this year. Macron's party was completely thrashed in that election. And who won? The right-wing National Rally. They won the European Parliament elections. So Macron took a massive gamble. He called for snap elections to strengthen his position in France. Much like Scholz, he wanted a fresh mandate. But what he got was a hung parliament. Macron took 2 months to appoint a consensus prime minister. His name was Michel Barnier, and he lasted all of 90 days. So last week, President Macron appointed another prime minister. It tells you how weak he is at the moment. Polls show that a majority of French people want President Macron to resign. And this is the state of Europe's twin engines. Germany's government is on its way out, and France's government could follow any day. This is bad news for two reasons. Number one, Germany and France are key to Europe's economy. They make up 41% of the region's GDP. And number two, leadership issues. Germany and France take all the big calls in Europe. They're the face of European diplomacy, which is why turmoil in Paris and Berlin is worrying for Brussels, especially with Donald Trump looming. Trump is famously not a fan of Europe or NATO. In his first term, Europe managed to weather that storm, largely because of stable leadership. Macron was the shiny new centrist darling, and Angela Merkel was leading Germany, a seasoned and mature politician. This time, Trump will deal with a European churn. Macron will be a lot weaker, and Germany will likely have a new chancellor. So who can European nations look up to? Many believe it could be Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She was recently ranked the most powerful person in Europe. No nuclear weapons, no economic miracle, yet Meloni beat the likes of Scholz and Macron. How is that? For starters, her domestic position is quite strong. Her party has done well in recent elections. That is one reason. And secondly, she's close to Trump and his advisors, especially Elon Musk. Many expect her to be the bridge between Brussels and Washington. It tells you how European dynamics are changing, and these political changes are not happening in a vacuum. They are a symptom of economic worries. France's budget deficit is increasing. It was 5.5% last year. It's 6.1% this year. Overall debt is 112% of the national GDP. France is projected to grow by just 0.8% next year. For comparison, the United States is expected to grow by 2.5%. Germany is probably worse off. Their GDP is expected to contract by 0.1% this year, and next year it could grow by 0.7%. Now, to be fair, most of Europe is struggling, but when the big two struggle, the impact is bigger. The question is this a temporary glitch in Brussels, or is it a sign of things to come? Because the Franco-German partnership defined the rise of Europe after the Second World War. They dominated Brussels for more than half a century. But will political and economic weakness end that reign? As they say, only time will tell. Let's turn to the war in Ukraine, which has taken another dramatic turn. The latest move has come from Kiev. They've killed a top Russian general, that too inside Moscow, in the heart of the Russian capital. The Ukrainian security service carried out a blast. They killed a high-ranking general and his assistant. Kiev has called him a legitimate target. Moscow says it's a provocation. Moscow has threatened retaliation. And look at the timing of the strike. In about a month from now, Trump will take over as US president. He wants to end the Ukraine war on day one. He plans to cut military aid to Ukraine at a time like this. Why has Kiev taken the war to Moscow? Our next report has the answer.
It was an ordinary winter day in Moscow. The snow filled the streets. The city was calm. Suddenly, a loud explosion shattered the peace. A bomb went off just a few miles from the Kremlin. The blast was so strong, it shook the nearby buildings.
At first we thought that cement might have been unloaded or something similar, but the blast was so loud that it did not seem like construction works. It was very scary.
The target was this man, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov. He was about to leave for office when a bomb, hidden outside his apartment, went off. It was planted on a scooter outside the general's home. The explosion killed him almost instantly. Even the general's assistant wasn't spared. General Kirillov was a top military official of Russia. He was the chief of Russia's nuclear, chemical, and biological defense forces. He was also a prominent spokesperson for the Kremlin. In the past, he has targeted Kyiv by accusing them of a plot to deploy chemical and nuclear weapons. None of those claims have been substantiated. Beyond propaganda, General Kirillov was on Kyiv's target list for another reason. Ukraine claims he was behind a chemical attack. Kyiv accuses the Russian forces of deploying an agent called chloropicrin. It's a toxic gas. Chloropicrin was first used in World War II. The gas isn't lethal, but it causes extreme irritation and pain, both in the eyes and the lungs. The Chemical Weapons Convention bans its use. Russia is a signatory to this treaty. Despite that, Ukraine says that Russia used this gas on its soldiers. Apparently, General Kirillov gave the order himself. On Monday, Ukraine's security service opened a criminal probe against him. A day later, he was neutralized in Moscow. Ukrainian officials have quietly claimed credit for the attack in the Western press. It's a significant signal. It shows how Ukraine is no longer hesitant to strike deep inside Russia, even in its capital, Moscow. More importantly, the attack is a clear demonstration of capabilities. Ukrainian intelligence didn't just get close to their target, they successfully planted a bomb powerful enough to eliminate a top Russian general. This is a serious breach in Russian defenses. Moscow is now threatening retaliation. Russia's Security Council has issued a statement vowing to hit back. The conflict in Ukraine is deepening and expanding. New battlegrounds are emerging. For Ukraine, even Moscow is now fair game.
Our next story is about Argentina. The country has seen a massive economic turnaround. After almost a year, Argentina has exited a recession. Their GDP rose by 3.9% in the last quarter, the July to September quarter. This is the first time in about a year that they've seen growth, the first time since the recession began. Do you know what else happened about a year ago? Javier Milei became the president of Argentina. He assumed office on December 10, 2023. He came to power promising radical reform. He promised to take a chainsaw to the government, cut jobs, regulations and excess spending. Milei actually campaigned with a real chainsaw to drive the point home, and it won him the election. But Milei was written off when he took office. He was seen as too radical, too chaotic. But now it seems that his plan is working. He announced the end of the recession a week ago, on the first anniversary of his presidency. Take a look.
Today, with pride and hope, I can tell you that we have passed the test of fire. We are leaving the desert, the recession is over, and the country has finally begun to grow. Thank you for trusting this government.
Before Milei took over, Argentina was in a doom spiral. Annual inflation was almost 200%. Milei has been chipping away at this too. Inflation is still ridiculously high in this country at about 166%, but last month it grew by just 2.4%. That's the lowest in over 4 years. Before he was sworn in, prices were rising by almost 13% every single month. 13%. So 2.4% is a massive improvement. Now combine this with Argentina coming out of recession, and Milei seems to have achieved the impossible. He says it's all because of his chainsaw.
We reduced the number of ministries from 18 to 8. We eliminated nearly 100 secretariats and undersecretaries. We closed more than 200 areas that had duplicate or obsolete functions. We froze the salaries of high-ranking officials from January until now. We fired 34,000 public employees and are testing the qualifications of the others.
Basically, he made Argentina's government more efficient by cutting away excess jobs. Does that concept sound familiar? It should, at least to the people of the US, because that's exactly what Donald Trump is gearing up to do. He is bringing in DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. It will be led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Both men admire Javier Milei's approach. Ramaswamy even said that he wants, and I'm quoting, Milei-style cuts on steroids. And Trump himself has praised Javier Milei. He's also invited the Argentinian president to his inauguration. So both Milei and Mileinomics are about to come to the US. But that's not all. He's found fans in Vietnam too. This country has a communist government. They too are planning to cut ministries to reduce red tape. So by the looks of it, Mileinomics is here to stay. It might radically transform governments around the world and fix ingrained economic issues. But despite its success in Argentina, it also has a dark side. The economic turnaround has come at a price.
My in-laws are retired and the truth is that they are not having a very good time. My partner helps them. We live together and it's difficult. The rent has gone up again. Yes, it's complicated.
Millet cut spending on a lot of social services. He eliminated subsidies on public transport, heating, groceries. He also got rid of price controls. So while inflation has fallen, some basic costs have risen sharply. And this has pushed 5 million Argentinians into poverty. When Millet took over, 40% of the people were in poverty. In 6 months, that figure rose to 53%. But the president says things will get better. He's been saying this since he took charge.
Si bien vamos a tener que soportar un periodo de dureza, vamos a salir adelante. No hay noche que no haya sido derrotada por el día.
The dawn seems to be breaking. The recession has ended, inflation is down, and there is hope in the Argentinian economy again. But is this economy working for everyone? Are the people pushed into poverty willing to give Millet more time? Has his midterm election, he has in fact midterm elections coming up next year, that will give us an answer. We'll see if people really support Millet-nomics or if the pill proves to be too bitter to swallow.
जो अत्याचार हो रहा है माइनॉरिटीज़ पे, जो बांग्लादेश के हिंदू हैं, बांग्लादेश के ईसाई हैं, उसके बारे में कुछ करें, बात करें बांग्लादेश की सरकार के साथ, अत्याचार बंद कराएं।
देखिए, वो इंदिरा गांधी की पोती है, जवाहरलाल की परनातनी है, तो वो कुछ भी कर सकती हैं। उनको फिलिस्तीनी से प्रेम है, पाकिस्तानी से प्रेम है, बांग्लादेश से प्रेम है, उनको हिंदुस्तान से प्रेम नहीं।
अब राजनीति में बैग से राजनीति होगी, बैग से देश चलेगा, यही दुखद है। अब बैगवा तो हम लेके चला, कोनो बैग तो ही नहीं, तो हम भी भगवा पहन लेंगे। अब इसे तो देश ना चली, देश चलता तर्क वितर्क करने से, विचारों से, विजन से। बैग से देश चलने लगा, बैग से क्या संदेशा है, हमको ये समझ में नहीं आता। अब वो जमाना गया है कि बैग दिखाएं और टोपा दिखाएं और टोपी दिखाएं, उससे नहीं चली। देश अब मोदी जी ने बातों से, कर्मों से, कार्यों से, ईमानदारी से, विजन से, दूरदृष्टा सोच से देश चलेगा। इकोनॉमी को स्ट्रांग करना है, बैग से देश नहीं चलता भैया।
ये प्रियंका वाड्रा का टोट बैग नहीं, ये प्रियंका वाड्रा का सिंबॉलिक वोट बैग है। एक नया बैग निकला है माइनॉरिटीज ऑफ बांग्लादेश। अरे वाह प्रियंका जी, जरा बताइए ये माइनॉरिटीज कौन है, जरा नाम लेकर बताते ना। हिंदूज, वैसे तो आप बोलते रहते हैं पूरे देश में कि मुस्लिम्स आर अंडर थ्रेट, इस्लामोफोबिया है। यहाँ तो आइडेंटिफाई हो जाता है विक्टिम आपका, वहां पे विक्टिम आइडेंटिफाई नहीं हो रहा है आपका। बांग्लादेश में माइनॉरिटीज आर अंडर थ्रेट, वी स्टैंड विद माइनॉरिटीज, व्हाई नॉट से दैट यू स्टैंड विद हिंदू? साफ साफ क्यों नहीं बोलते? व्हाइट वॉशिंग का बैग है ये सिंबोलिज्म और टोकनिज्म की निशानी है ये। और सवाल ये बनता है कि माइनॉरिटीज और बांग्लादेश की चिंता आज कर रही हैं। सीए लॉ विरोध किसने किया? सीए लॉ जिसका पूरा का पूरा लक्ष्य था कि ऐसे प्रताड़ित लोगों को सुरक्षा दी जाए, उसका विरोध करने के लिए एक बैग कैरी कीजिए कि हम माफी मांगते हैं कि सीए का विरोध किया।
Well, what's there in a bag? Plenty if it's making a political point. That's exactly what Priyanka Gandhi Vadra did on day 2 when this time round she carried a bag saying that the minorities in Bangladesh need to be protected. She was of course referring to both the Hindus as well as the Christians. Remember when she carried an earlier bag on Palestine that had evoked a sharp response from the BJP where they asked her this question that you're feeling very strongly for the Palestinians because of your vote bank politics. But what about the minorities being attacked in Bangladesh? At that point of time, she had rebutted by saying that I will wear what I want to. This is a deep-seated mindset of patriarchy where men will dictate to a woman what she wants to wear. Well, on day 2, she made that political point and tried to rebut the BJP in her own way by carrying a bag. It's a cloth bag. It also very clearly says that save the minorities of Bangladesh. With this, she hopes to silence her critics in the BJP and some outside as well who...
The United States spends almost $900 billion on defense. A lot of people will say this is wasteful. Why not use this money for public good or to fight climate change or to rebuild war-torn nations? But those people are all mistaken. America's big budget is not aimed at other countries. It is aimed at aliens and UFOs. Just ask Hollywood. Aliens always attack the United States first. So Washington has to be prepared. And recently, some believe that that moment had come because dozens of mysterious drones were spotted over American skies. We told you about this yesterday. Apparently, American taxpayers are worried now. They're asking why the drones are in New Jersey and not targeting civilians in West Asia like they're supposed to. All this confusion has spawned great jokes on social media. Take a look at this.
Return from whence you came.
To 10, 12, 15, folks.
4 hours ago. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. What would you do if you became the youngest world chess champion? For D. Gukesh, it was bungee jumping in Singapore. A powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake hits the island nation of Vanuatu, and Bolivia's giant Christ statue lights up ahead of Christmas. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1903, the Wright brothers achieved the first successful flight. Their airplane was made of wood and fabric. It had a 12-horsepower engine. The flight lasted for 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Big breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin. This is coming in from Tamil Nadu, where the 1998 Coimbatore blast mastermind who murdered 58 Indians and injured 231 others was allowed a grand funeral procession by the local administration. S.A. Basha, a key member of the Al-Umma radical outfit, died serving time in jail. After permission from the local administration, thousands were allowed to pay tribute to the terrorist in Coimbatore. The BJP has now raised questions against the DMK government for allowing this funeral procession in Coimbatore. Let's listen in.
Congress and India Alliance and their allies always put vote bank niti above Rashtra niti. Political vote bank security over national security. When a convicted terrorist S.A. Basha, who was responsible as the mastermind of the Coimbatore blast that led to the killing of 58 innocent Indians, 200 plus people were injured. When such a person who is the mastermind has died, he should be not hailed, but he should be condemned. But rather than that, the Tamil Nadu government made special provision for his janaza to be taken out so that he could be eulogized and hailed as a martyr. People were chanting religious slogans also for him. This was allowed, and they were given the complete security, deployment, police protection to do this. This is the mindset of India Alliance.
Strong charges coming in from the BJP. I'm joined by my colleague Purnima Murli on the broadcast. So Purnima, this has become another flashpoint between the BJP and the DMK in Tamil Nadu. But take us through how permission was granted for this funeral procession.
In fact, 1,500 police personnel were deployed for the procession to take place. It was a 5-kilometer procession. The BJP, however, says it's a black day because permission was given to the mastermind behind the Coimbatore blast. Remember, one of the blasts that took place was just a few meters away from where L.K. Advani was all set to address the gathering, and resulted in the loss of more than 50 people and over 200 injured. Therefore, the BJP says, how can the police give permission for the funeral procession to take place? They had in fact urged both the government and the police to stop the procession from taking place, saying that he's not a martyr, he's a terrorist. However, the procession took place at around 3:20 p.m. today, and he was laid to rest in Coimbatore amid 1,500 heavy police security.
Right, and any reaction coming in from the DMK, given the charges coming in from the BJP, that this is pure appeasement politics coming in from the ruling dispensation?
Well, the DMK maintains that it's the police that had given permission, and this has nothing to do with appeasement politics. That's the word that's coming in from the DMK. However, BJP calls it a black day, says that a terrorist being given so much being treated like a martyr is against the rules, and therefore they've attacked both the DMK and the police for going ahead with the procession for a terrorist who was involved in the 1998 Coimbatore blast.
Right. Thank you, Purnima, for getting us the latest amid this latest flashpoint between the DMK and the BJP. Remember, 58 Indians and 231 others were killed in the 1998 blast. And as you can see, under the watch of the local administration in Coimbatore, this terrorist was given pretty much a huge funeral procession was allowed, where he was pretty much given a hero's farewell. So big questions being raised against the DMK government in Tamil Nadu. But shifting focus to some more breaking news. Now, the Supreme Court today dismissed the Tamil Nadu government's challenge to a Madras High Court decision transferring the investigation into the Kallakurichi Hooch tragedy to the Central Bureau of Investigation. The tragedy claimed 68 lives in June and July this year. The High Court had passed the order, in November after expressing disappointment over the state government's alleged failure to take stern action against the police as well as other officials. So the CBI probe stands when it comes to the Kallakurichi Hooch tragedy. That is the order coming down from the Supreme Court, which dismissed the Tamil Nadu government's plea against the Madras High Court order, which cleared the CBI investigation. To get more details on the arguments inside the court, I'm joined by my colleague Ananya Bhatnagar on the broadcast. Ananya, over to you.
Well, definitely, the Kallakurichi Dam matter is something, the Kallakurichi Pooch tragedy was something that had claimed over 68 lives this year. And, the High Court had, in fact, directed for a CBI probe after noting that, the police had failed. But at the same point of time, that was challenged by the particular government there before the topmost court of the country. However, no kind of the arguments were accepted by the Supreme Court, and it said that, since it was a very well-reasoned order, and hence, at this particular point of time, this cannot be accepted, and hence, the Supreme